All right, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Sujay King Liu. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers, and it's my pleasure, my honor to host this event as Dean of the College of Engineering. So welcome to the Ernest S. Kuh Distinguished Lecture. This is the 9th of an annual series that brings outstanding leaders in engineering, technology, and computer engineering and computer science to our campus. And the very first of this series was a lecture given by Andy Grove, who's a co-founder of Intel Corporation. And every year since then, we've brought outstanding leaders in engineering to this series. So I'm really excited today to be able to introduce Surbhi Sarna, who earned her bachelor's degree from Berkeley in 2007. But first of all, let me tell you a little bit about this lecture series. It's an endowed lecture series enabled by the generous support of Ernest and Bettine Kuh. They are really outstanding friends of the College of Engineering. Ernest Kuh was an outstanding faculty member in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences. He was a leader in design of integrated circuits, the computer-aided design industry. He also served as Dean of the College of Engineering, and he's been an exemplar for me and all other faculty here. It's unfortunate we lost Ernie a few years ago, but really grateful to see his family, Bettine here, and also his son, Ted. So at this point, I'd like to, first of all, ask you to join me in expressing appreciation to the Kuh family for this event, and then to welcome Ted Kuh come up to say a few remarks on behalf of the Kuh family. So this is Dr. Ted Kuh.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dean Liu, and a warm welcome to all, especially our Cal students. My father was incredibly passionate about working with students, especially those interested in entrepreneurship, whose ideas could transform an industry. And to that end, he would have been very pleased to have Surbhi Sarna as our 9th Distinguished Lecturer in this series. I had the opportunity to meet Surbhi in 2013, and over the last 7 years, have seen firsthand how she built and scaled a truly incredible company that will save tens of thousands of people's lives. People often ask me what qualities I look for in an entrepreneur. And of course, you need an entrepreneur that is extremely intelligent and that has a very good idea. But for me, what distinguishes a truly extraordinary entrepreneur are 4 attributes. Somebody with a real passion, who's got incredible grit, who has empathy and leadership skills. In Surbhi's journey with Envision, she had to overcome many challenges, starting with, of course, securing initial funding for the company. Shortly thereafter, she demonstrated her leadership skills by successfully recruiting a world-class team and medical advisory board. She has a talent for working with everyone, including her team, her partners, the regulators, and investors, and all in a very collaborative and empathetic manner. I think you'll find her story to be truly inspiring. So, on behalf of my mother and the Kuh family, we'd like to thank Dean Liu for her strong commitment to entrepreneurship and for her leadership at the College of Engineering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kuh. Before proceeding to introduce our speaker, I'd just like to acknowledge that today's event is also co-sponsored by the Management, Entrepreneurship, and Technology Student Board, and we really appreciate them for their support to ensure a successful event. Okay, another thing that some of you already might be aware is that this year at UC Berkeley, we're celebrating the 150th anniversary of the occasion where the University of California Regents passed a resolution to allow women to enroll here on our campus. So the very first female students were admitted in 1872, and the first woman graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture in 1874. Since that time, hundreds of thousands of women have graduated from our campus and have made a great, impactful contributions to our society. So our speaker today, Surbhi Sarna, is one of these women. So let me tell you a little bit more about her incredible journey. Dr. Kuh already mentioned a little bit. He mentioned multiple times that she's empathetic as a leader, and as not only of human beings, it also is for animals in our world. So I would encourage you, due to limited time, to look up this YouTube video. The title is "Startup CEO Risks Injury." That means like having your hand bitten off. To rescue a beached shark. So there's a baby salmon shark that was beached, and she basically took it, I think, by the tail, and that's her up there in the water. So went pretty far out into the water, above her shoulders, in order to make sure that the baby shark wouldn't wash back onto shore. So she's an exemplary, empathetic leader. So that's one nice thing about her. So what's amazing is she received her Bachelor of Arts, graduated in 2007, and just 3 years after graduation, in 2010, she founded the company Envision, which is an innovative company that creates medical devices and technology to fill a need in women's healthcare. And she'll tell you more about that in technical detail, but it's really devices to be able to detect ovarian cancer. So in 2014, she made Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 list. And in 2018, her company was purchased by Boston Scientific. And today, her company is solving problems that impacts the lives of millions of women. So as Ted mentioned, her talk is going to trace her journey as an entrepreneur. So from patient to impatient entrepreneur, the bumpy road to multi-million-dollar exit. So please join me in welcoming Surbhi to the stage.
Anything else? COVID-19. Okay, there we go.
This is working.
It's working?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for the warm welcome. It feels so nice to be back on campus, and a special thank you to the Kuh family and Ted for having me here today, and Bettine, it was so great to meet you. It truly is an honor to be giving a talk in your father's name. Okay, so what I'd like to do today is share my journey from, first having a ovarian cancer health scare, and then turning that into a company, and then leading it through acquisition. Now, as I go through my journey, I don't mean to imply at all that this is the only road that works. This is simply, what worked for me. So if I can share a few pearls from that journey, and inspires any of you to pursue the path of entrepreneurship. Anybody in this room just thinking about eventually becoming an entrepreneur? Good, wonderful. Glad I'm in the right place then. Let's first talk about how the idea occurred to me. So my journey actually begins when I was in high school. I was writing a paper on Emerson when all of a sudden I felt such a sharp pain in my side that I could barely make it to the kitchen and tell my mom that my side hurts before blacking out. And the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. Of course, I didn't know it then, but it was going to be the first of many trips. I finally found out that I was suffering from complex ovarian cysts. But what they couldn't tell me is whether or not these masses were cancerous. And your options at that point, if you can even call them options or choices, is you either have an invasive surgery where the ovary is removed and you have a higher risk for heart disease and osteoporosis, or you sit and wait and see if you have one of the most lethal cancers impacting women. So from the unnecessarily long diagnostic times to the lack of therapeutic options, I started my journey from being a patient to inpatient entrepreneur to try to see that if I could prevent other families from having to make the difficult decisions that my mom and I had to make at that time. And our family was blessed in that the masses turned out to be benign, but everything that I did from that point in time to starting the company, I thought, how does this put me in a better position to start a company, and what can I learn from this experience? Of course, including my time at UC Berkeley. So with that story, and I'm so glad and so happy to see that so many of you aspire to be entrepreneurs. One phenomena that's happening right now is that some people want to become entrepreneurs for the sake of being an entrepreneur. Really, what the most successful entrepreneurs I know, what they did was they found a problem they truly believed in. And I love this quote from Emerson: "A good indignation brings out all one's powers." Because to start a company and to run that company successfully, you do need to find a problem that you're a little bit upset about, right? Maybe a lot upset about. And that will give you the drive and the passion and even the creativity to keep going in the face of obstacle after obstacle, of which there'll be many, right? So the key thing to remember there is, do not become an entrepreneur for the sake of becoming an entrepreneur. Make sure there's a concept you can truly believe in, and that you can give everything to it day in and day out, and that thinking about that problem brings you joy and satisfaction, okay? If you don't have an idea today, but you want to be an entrepreneur, immerse yourself in that field, and eventually, you will come up with a concept. But don't rush that initial phase of finding something that you truly believe in. So for me, out of my healthcare scare, and then through my education at Berkeley, and then my early work, I then founded Envision Medical, which tackled problems impacting women's health, a couple of different disease states. Our primary focus was ovarian cancer because of my experience. And a few years ago, scientists realized that ovarian cancer doesn't actually start on the ovary. So ovarian cancer itself is a misnomer. In fact, the majority of the most lethal forms of ovarian cancer begin in the fallopian tube. So I thought to myself, why not create something similar to a pap smear, where you can access the full length of the fallopian tube, take a cell sample, and then look for abnormalities. So it was that product that my team and I developed over the last 7 years before the sale of the company to Boston Scientific. And go Bears. And such a big part of my entrepreneurial journey happened at UC Berkeley. Of course, not only through the world-class education, but also because all the opportunities outside of the classroom. I think at the time, I might have taken a little bit for granted how you could study and immerse yourself in basically any interest. There would already be a club that existed, but I also had the pleasure of doing research for Professor Milfraud and the bioengineering department while I was here, and just so grateful to the school for everything that it gave me. And another thing that it gave me, in addition to the world-class education, of course, was grit, right? That's something that at UC Berkeley, you come here and you have to work hard. There's no silver platter treatment, right? And that is exactly what it's like to be an entrepreneur. Every single thing that you accomplish takes hard work. And Berkeley is a place where you get out of it what you put in. And that is exactly what it's like to be an entrepreneur. You get out of the journey what you put in. So again, that's why you don't become an entrepreneur for the sake of becoming an entrepreneur. You find something you're upset about, you're passionate about it, and you put everything you have into it, and then it's surely to give back. So now talking a little bit more about the necessity for the device that the Envision team created. So ovarian cancer is a very complex disease to diagnose, and that's because the symptoms very much overlap with symptoms of benign disease states. So for example, you could be suffering from endometriosis or polycystic ovarian syndrome or a bunch of other benign conditions where you have the same sort of pain, bloating, bleeding, but there's no good way to work up those symptoms, right? And many women suffer some sort of variation of those symptoms once a month. So what are you going to do? Test these patients once a month. And as a result, most ovarian cancers which are finally diagnosed are in the later stages, right, where the 5-year survival rate is 15% or less. The only thing that you can do today is a transvaginal ultrasound, which tells you the size of the mass and that it exists, but does not tell you whether that mass is cancerous. It simply gives you an image. It tells you if it's fluid-filled or if it's solid or a mix. But as soon as it's a mix of solid or fluid, or it's solid, you then can't really tell anything past that. You have to kind of make your best guess, and it's up to the physician's discretion about whether or not they want to follow next steps. That was relaxing. Thank you. Okay, so the only other mechanism available is a blood test called CA-125. CA-125 has a false positive and false negative rate of above 30%, sometimes closer to 50%, which means it doesn't really tell you anything. It's kind of like flipping a coin. But physicians continue to use it because they have such a minimal array of tools in front of them. This is especially problematic for patients who are high risk for developing the disease. One of the most well-known patients is Angelina Jolie. She had a BRCA mutation, and when a patient has a BRCA mutation, they have up to a 70% lifetime risk of developing ovarian cancer. But the 5-year risk is relatively low, right? So the preventative surgery you do, first she got a mastectomy to reduce her chances of breast cancer, and the next step she did after a few years later was removal of her ovaries, or an oophorectomy. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, the ovaries are a command center in our body for hormonal balance. And when you remove the ovaries, the woman is put into a menopausal condition well before her body is ready to do that. So there's the obvious implication of fertility-related issues for younger patients, but there's also a risk of early onset of osteoporosis. There are many papers that argue it's better to leave the ovaries in and risk the chance of cancer versus have a heart attack, which an oophorectomy is almost sure to give you. And it leads to depression and all sorts of other things, right? I have several investors, or had several investors in the company who their wives had to go through this procedure, and they say, I invested in your company because the day my wife had the oophorectomy, I lost who she used to be. It really just changes who you are. So when a woman is 23 years old and finds out she has the BRCA mutation, especially with the average age in San Francisco of first child now being 34, it's not appropriate to just jump to surgery, but every day think about the anxiety that patient lives with. So if we could do something similar to a pap smear and grab those cells and look at whether there's cancerous changes in the cells, that would perhaps eventually, when we have enough clinical data, prolong how long that patient could keep their ovaries, but also give us definitive results in terms of when it is time to remove the anatomy. And what's great about this is the part that was the mechanical challenge or the engineering challenge was getting into the fallopian tubes, which have a consistency of a wet paper towel. So how do you thread a catheter or anything else through such an anatomy, which is why it was the first time that anyone had used balloon technology to actually capture cells on the outside of a balloon. But looking at the cells is something that we've done for years and years and years through the pap smear and basically any other biopsy, right? So you're not necessarily having to be too inventive on the science end of things, though there are unique molecular tests which are coming to market. As long as you could nail that engineering challenge of getting the cell sample, then you open up the potential for early detection. All right, so now that was sort of a little bit of the technical background, and there will be time for Q&A after this, but now I'll really get into the journey of what it took to get this company up and running. So the very first thing you do as an entrepreneur is you find an idea that you are passionate about or a problem that you're passionate about solving. And the next thing is to come up with a solution. But just because you think it's a good solution doesn't mean everybody will, right? So before you start fundraising or spending any more time on anything, you need to go talk to your customer base and ask them, hey, is this something, if I put this tool in your hands, will this work? Will it be something that you use for patients? Do you see the potential of this product? Now, when I first started the company, I was just, I think, 3.5 years out of school, and I didn't have a huge network of physicians and gynecologists that I could go to say, hey, do you think this is a good idea? I mean, you have to build that network from the ground up, right? I only knew one gynecologist. It happened to be my gynecologist. So again, that grit, that UC Berkeley grit, I called my gynecologist and pretended like I had an issue. And then I went in, and then I floated the idea past the physician. She's like, excuse me? The speculum, I'm just kidding. Those aren't my legs, guys. My legs aren't white. I know, it's crazy. But so that's the thing, right? In the beginning, you gotta work your network as much as you can, take every meeting that's in front of you. And what that does is, this is my network when I first started, but it's an endless, in the very beginning, if you don't just try to put too much of a screen up on who you're trying to meet, you never know where that conversation is going to go, right? So, all right, the gynecologist that I went to, my own gynecologist, and I talked to her, she introduced me to physicians at UC Davis and at Stanford, boo. But she was also like the director of women's health at Stanford, so I did take that meeting. And they really, they just kept on introducing me to more and more physicians that were more and more excited about it. So when I went out to fundraise and the venture capitalist said, okay, you think this is a good idea, who else? Ted mentioned the advisory board, medical advisory board we put together. It was just a slide full of names, and they could call any one of them, right? So from knowing no gynecologists and doing something kind of embarrassing to having this really robust list, it was worth it. Now, on the investment side of things, I also didn't know anybody, but I remember that in high school, I had that one friend whose dad started a company, so I went over to her house for dinner to ask him for advice. Well, he wasn't very helpful. But his wife was there and said, oh, hey, I know a friend that runs clinical trials out of India. I was like, well, that's not that helpful at this point, clinical trials out of India. But it's closer. She's in healthcare. Let me go talk to her. I took that meeting, spent the time on that. She eventually introduced me to my very first advisor and my fourth investor in the company, right? So in the beginning, try not to be too selective. As the company continues to grow, you'll have to be extremely selective. But in the beginning, just meet everybody, because you don't know. That's actually one of the most fun things about being an entrepreneur. You don't know where the journey's going to take you. You don't know where each meeting's going to take you. You don't know where each design iteration is going to take you. And you actually find joy in that uncertainty. And the same type of networking is also relevant when finding that world-class team to back you. And so for me, I knew for the healthcare industry and for medical devices that I didn't have enough experience in navigating regulatory hurdles or challenges in commercialization. So I wanted to get behind me a very, very experienced team. So I did the same thing. One trick is sometimes people think the only time they need to pitch and talk about their idea passionately is when they're talking to investors. In reality, whenever I hired an entry-level engineer, a technician, I was all in their face about how good this idea was. I mean, I was pitching my heart out to them. And I think when they saw that drive, it attracted them to the company, because the most valuable thing someone can give you isn't actually money. What is it? It's their time, right? It's their time. You're asking this person, out of all the other opportunities they have in the Silicon Valley, to come to you, to believe in you, to spend years with you building the product. And each one of the early people that joined me, they stayed with me till the very end. They knew that their time was well respected by me and honored by me, and that also they loved the product, right? So just remember that. If you're an entrepreneur, you are pitching to whoever you talk to. Every single person that is giving their time to you is valuable time, okay? From every advisor, every meeting. You know, another thing is sometimes entrepreneurs will show up to a meeting with a potential advisor or someone who's in the space without a discrete list of questions. They'll just kind of show up and they'll sit there and be like, oh, it's so nice to meet you. And then you're like, well, what can I help you with? And it's much better if you research this person's background, see what in their past and their journey relates to yours, and say, hey, I saw that you invented this, or you connected with this investor, what were your challenges? And then if they have questions that you can't answer at that time, make sure that you follow up. And I really credit both of those things, preparedness when going into a meeting and then following up with questions after the meeting, as part of the reason that I was able to attract such a great team that I was just so blessed to work with, and great advisors and eventually great investors. So another thing about fundraising. Now, going out and raising money, especially for a healthcare startup, which has so much uncertainty, when all you have is a slide deck and a dream, is pretty difficult. One thing is not to rush the process, is not to rush when you go out and you actually start raising that money, because each investor will give you an hour, and if you can't answer their questions in that 1 hour, there's no redos with them. And there's a finite number of investors, especially in the healthcare space, but any space, right? So sometimes people will try to use investors to validate their concept, but your concept should be fully validated with your customers and with regulatory experts or otherwise before you ever show up at any investor's doorstep. Okay, so there shouldn't be a question where they can stump you. So the story itself should be on autopilot, also so that you can read the room. Okay, so sometimes when you're pitching and you mention the market, you can tell that one investor responded really positively to that. So maybe you can revisit it later, right? Or you could tell there was a skeptical look. And because your talk is on autopilot, you're actually able to read the audience and change things in real time. And so knowing your audience is incredibly important. And one thing I realized as I was pitching, there was a word I had to say a lot while I pitched, and it was vagina. I placed the device into the vagina, and I'm pitching to a room full of men, and sometimes I'd say vagina and they'd lean in more, and they're like, just don't have any reaction, like lean in more or they like back up. Oh, I'm like, okay, well, and for a while, I started saying the word transvaginal. That put their mind at ease. But it's picking up nuances like that and being able to respond. Now I just say vagina, but it's being able to respond that really makes a difference, being able to read the room. And same thing goes for when you talk to the media. This was really early on. I just raised my Series A round of funding, and someone called me from Bloomberg to do an interview, and they asked, hey, it was a male journalist, so very tuned in, what's it like to raise money? from VCs. Like, you talk about women's health all the time. So I told him the vagina story that I told you. And then, of course, the title that he came up with is to pitch VCs, just don't say vagina, editor's pick of the week. And I had to explain to my investors why that was just going to blow over. And then they picked it as editor's pick. So always be very in tune with what you're saying to who and make sure the time's appropriate. I mean, I like the title, but it's a little controversial maybe. All right, so eventually going through the 7 years from 2012 to 2018, the acquisition, it was an incredible journey, and it was a lot of really hard work. But when people see the journey now from the outside, what they see is this, okay? And this article, as much as I appreciate it, and I thought Forbes did a great job announcing the news, when you read it, it kind of makes it look easy, or like it happened overnight. And one thing about being an entrepreneur that all of you should know is that it is a long-term commitment, okay? So we raised 17 million, we sold for 275. It was a great return for all of the employees and all of the investors and the shareholders, but it just took an amazing amount of grueling work. And again, that is why you do not become an entrepreneur for the sake of being an entrepreneur, because if you pick an idea that you're not passionate about, but then you somehow get some momentum behind it, you may still be locked into it for 5 to 7 years, when you could have been working on something that you were truly passionate about. So in 2012, I raised my first round of seed funding. The $350,000 took me about a year to raise. People ask me how many no's I got, and I don't know, because simply I lost count. It was a ton of no's, but you just have to remember, as an entrepreneur, again, if you're working on something you're passionate about, all it takes is one yes, right? So kept at it, found a wonderful group of women that didn't know one another before. My first 4 investors were all women that believed in it, and with that money built a prototype. And in 2013, I went out to raise my Series A funding to get approval for that device. And that's where Ted came in, and he was one of my most passionate supporters and backers, and convinced other people in his network to invest in the company as well. And unlike Theranos, I had all healthcare. Was it Stanford? She's Stanford. So unlike that company that I already named, that shall not be named again, that Stanford company, I had all healthcare investors in my company that led the rounds, and then other folks who we could then depend on the diligence that they did, and so that brought Ted on board, who's interested, who brought more and more people, and I'm just so grateful again, Ted, for your support through the years. Thank you. So in 2013, we raised that round of funding. We then had our first in human trials, and it is an amazing thing to think of a product for years, to conceptualize it, to sketch it out, to build the prototype, to scale it down, and then to see what it needs to do in a person, and to actually collect those cells first ever time on a balloon, first ever time the full length of the fallopian tube was successfully navigated, and the first time the FDA gave clearance to any device to do anything in the full length of the fallopian tube, and the first time the FDA gave clearance to a balloon to collect cells. 80 patients worth of data. We did in 4.5 million, small team, just one of the most exciting times, clearly, of my life. And then that propelled us to be able to raise a Series B round of funding that was 12 million. I don't know how I could already forget that. 12 million, again, led by a healthcare venture fund. And I thought that, okay, I'm going to have to finish this clinical study, then I have to go to market, and then I'll be in a position to sell the company. But what happened after our first set of clinical data, where we were actually starting to diagnose, pick up, I should say, cancer cells from the fallopian tube, when the big companies started hearing about the data, they started approaching me. So you can't always control the timing of when the news gets out there. It ended up being a competitive process, and I'm so lucky that the device found a home at Boston Scientific. So we are still today working on clinical trials. I'm still part of the team to do that. We're hoping to commercialize the product next year. And it's been a fantastic journey. So I think in conclusion, before we open up for questions, I just want to say again that the most rewarding work is when you find something you could truly give all of yourself to, that you could put your heart into, because work consumes so much of our day. So better to spend that time on something that we truly love and with people that we truly appreciate the time that they've put into it. So with that, thank you so much, and I'll open up for questions.
Okay, so we always give preference to students for asking questions. Please introduce yourself, your name, your major, and your year. In the back first.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Deepshika. I'm currently a junior studying engineering at Berkeley. It's been great hearing about your journey throughout your time here. I was wondering what advice you have for college students who are in their undergrad who aren't necessarily sure what they're passionate about and how they can go about finding that.
That's a great question, thank you. So the advice that I would have when you're on this amazing campus that's just bursting with opportunity and you don't know quite what you want to do yet, is to expose yourself to as a variety of activities as you possibly can. For example, one of my other areas of interest is education, and through a program at Berkeley, I was able to volunteer at local schools and spend time in the classroom. And so the more that you're out there engaging with the activities on campus and everything they have to offer, the more likely you are that something really sparks your interest.
Back here.
Hi, thank you for sharing your wonderful journey with us. I'm Priyaj, I'm in the Eng program. I was just curious if you were ever faced with the decision to bring on a new CEO and how you dealt with that. I was just curious to know.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I had lots of honest conversations with my board through the entire journey, but especially at the end when things were really ramping up about whether or not I was the right person to run the company. The most important thing is that you're part of the company and making it succeed, right? Not what your title is. But in my case, all of my investors and I continue to believe that the title was rightfully placed. So I didn't have to face the question about whether or not to find a new CEO, but I'm friends with many, many entrepreneurs that have, and I think the most important part of it is that you're part of the process of picking the new CEO, and that they have experience or something else to bring to the table that you don't have, and if you use that as a learning opportunity, then you're a sponge. You get to pick up all of the experience and talent that they're bringing to the table. But personally, I didn't have to do that.
One more back here.
Hi, I'm Kitty, studying biomedical engineering. So my question is, how do you find your initial team, or you're just the founder and you approach to the 4 investor at the very beginning?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So and finding a team can be difficult. So sometimes what people default to is like picking their roommate or like a friend. But I don't know, you don't actually have to raise your hands, but I'm sure a few of you have had the experience of living with a friend and it didn't totally work out and now you don't talk to that person anymore. So just think about that, but on steroids for starting a company. I think what you should do is kind of think about the next 5 years or even shorter, 1 year, of what needs to be accomplished, and then if you could design a perfect person for that, just sketch it out. So start with what you need and then trying to find the person that fits that. For me, I worked at another startup before I worked on Envision, and I really, really liked my boss, the VP of R&D there. So when I needed a VP of R&D, I approached him and said, hey, I really liked it when you were my boss. Do you want to try me being your boss? And he was like, I guess. And then he stuck with me for like 7 years, you know? So after you have that list of what you need, you can kind of go back into your network and be creative, you know, about where to find those people.
Hi, my name is Saida, and I'm a graduate student in the BHGAP program, which is primarily an entrepreneurship program. I was wondering if somebody has a background in medicine, medical research, biotechnology, and they're looking, I mean, before they start or can start working on their own startup, if they were to work in a company, and if they're skilled at, or if they find potential in problem solving, ideation, strategy, which area or which particular job position would you suggest they work to get the experience before they begin with their startup?
Yeah, another really excellent question. And I knew when I graduated from Berkeley that I wanted some experience before starting the company. And so I said, which position should I go into? I think the key part of it is actually to get exposure to the clinical, to the regulatory, to the commercial aspects as you can. And the way that I got that, even though I worked as an engineer in R&D, was to be really open with the companies that were interviewing me that was my 5-year goal, right? So my boss wasn't actually completely surprised when I tried to hire him, because when he asked me what my 5-year goal was during the interview process, I was like, start a company dedicated to women's health. And he said, well, don't forget me when you start Surbhi Co. I don't know if he was sarcastic or not, but I didn't. I called him. So is that helpful? Yeah. Okay.
Hi, I'm Samyukta. I'm a freshman studying engineering physics. My question is kind of about, I really enjoyed the story part of your story, and I kind of wanted to know, was there any time when you were not able to maintain your vision when as an entrepreneur, and what kind of keeps you going on a day-to-day basis? Is there something you do to remind yourself of why you started in the first place?
Yeah, when I put my LinkedIn profile up and kind of described what I was working on, I was contacted by patients constantly, and nothing is more inspiring than remembering what it was like to be a patient myself, or to read those stories of someone who's just lost a sister or a mom to this lethal disease. So that kept me going a lot. And then honestly, a big part that kept me going was also my team. I worked with a remarkable technician who would be called an engineer, but he's lacking a formal degree in it. He crossed the border when he was 11 from Mexico and almost died doing it. And in order to make it to where he is today, like such a talented guy. I mean, he as a child slept on the floor of bars in San Francisco that he would stay there to clean. And so when I was thinking about why am I putting so much work into this, why go for such a big exit, I wanted him to be able to send his 3 kids to college. And the first one is there now. So it's your team. So it's your team that keeps you going, and it's the patients and what you're working on. Sorry about that.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. My name is Chirasri. I study computer science, and my question is, in the really early stages, how did you know that you were all in? Like, how did you know you wanted to bet on this before, the slide deck, before when you had the dream?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it was really understanding what patients had to go through. And basically every day, Steve Jobs gave this amazing graduation speech at Stanford. Boo. It's like my 4th time bringing up that other school. And please. And, every time, he said every day he looked himself in the mirror and said, I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure he's much more eloquent than I am. But he looked in the mirror and said, like, am I happy today? Like, am I working on something that I truly wanted to be working on? And then for me, I took that and added one line to it, which is there anything else that I could be working on which would bring me more satisfaction or more joy? And for me, the answer was always no. In fact, after the acquisition, I've had other opportunities to start other companies, and I've said no, and I've remained on the at the acquiring company because I still can't imagine a product that I would prefer to be working on. So I think that's a key part of it for me.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. My name is Saravia. I'm an engineering student, a sophomore here. I think my question centers around very similar to when did you realize you were all in, but really in that process of when you realized, okay, there's another product that we can make that would be a better solution. When did you realize that was viable? Was it after you'd done the research and in that path did you have to convince other people to buy into an idea that wasn't proven yet? How did you go about realizing that idea was viable and that you could make it happen?
Yeah, so I did not know that it was truly viable until 2017. Like, I mean, you're talking about like, wow. Hey, can you collect a cancerous cell from the fallopian tube, right? Would you guys like define that as like truly, okay, you can do this? Yeah, we did not do that till 2017. In 2013, I proved that we could get into the tubes of healthy patients and pick up healthy cells, but didn't prove to anybody that a pathologist could look at that cell sample and then pick up malignant changes, right? So there's different definitions of the viability, but truly like, oh wow, we can pick up these disease cells, that didn't happen until 2017. And so yes, I had to convince a lot of people about all sorts of different types of things. But what I always try to do is be really transparent about exactly where we were and what was left to do, to the point where I sometimes would undersell. So when we were raising our Series B round of funding, and I got a question from one of our investors like, hey, if you did sell after this round of funding, how much would you sell for? I said 75 million. I was like off a little bit. And so I always tried to be like as transparent as I could about where we were and what we had left to do. And the other thing is I reliably hit milestones. So if I told my investors that, hey, by this date we'll get this done, then I did. I did do that, and I made sure. And so we did not have fake deadlines at Envision. That's like not how the team operated. We'd have the next task at hand. We'd all get together. We'd all agree on a date, and everybody like, okay, is this the date it's happening? Is this the date we're submitting to the FDA? Yes, yes, yes. And then we would just work our butts off to hit that date. And so I think that builds a lot of credibility when you do that consistently. You say, hey, this is the game plan, and okay, now here is what I said we would do. It's done. Or, hey, this was the game plan, it changed a bit, but here's an equally good result. We had to be flexible, but this is where we are now.
Question
so I think that's what makes you kind of last through the years, I think.
Back in the back.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Jonathan, studying biomechanics. And you mentioned one of the more exciting moments in the whole process being the clinical trials. But what would be one of the lower moments, and how, as a team and as an individual, did you get through that from a leadership perspective?
It's a great question. So I think one of my lowest points was when I was trying to raise that Series Seed round of funding. And I had been talking to this woman about potentially putting money in for about 6 months. I had exhausted kind of all of my other sources of funding at that point, or at least it felt like it. But I finally convinced this woman. She finally got excited enough where she said, I'm going to fly you out to Boston, and I want you to meet with the rest of my partners. So at venture funds, individuals, and once you convince an individual, they pull you in to meet their whole team before they make the final investing decision. And I went in there and I gave my best possible presentation, and they were really excited and really engaged. And I felt so good about it. And she walked me to my car and she said, "Have a safe flight home. I think I'm gonna call you tomorrow with some good news." Yes, finally, a year. So don't count your chickens, don't count your chickens. I'm trying to talk myself down. So I'm waiting for that phone call, and the next day I get it, and she says, "Surbhi, I'm so sorry. I pushed as much as I could, and you're just too risky of an investment. I mean, really, it's a slide deck and a dream." Oh gosh, that was crushing. It was crushing. I spent the next 5 hours in bed, just let myself feel all of the emotions. And usually, gentlemen, when a woman says no, she means no. In this case, though, I could tell that that she was like a little hesitant. Like, it really broke her heart equally to say, Ted, this is Darshana. It really broke her heart to say no to me. So after those 5 hours of sulking, I called her back and I said, "Darshana, listen, I know I'm a risky investment, but invest in me, I'll take that risk with you. I'll move out of San Francisco, back to my parents' house, and for 2 years, I won't draw a salary." I used to split my lunches, lunch and dinner, like Subway sandwich, 12-inch. And she was like, "Oh, okay." So the next morning when she woke up, she went to her partnership and said, "Listen, gentlemen, either you invest in Surbhi with me or allow me to break my contract with you, which says that I can't do any individual investing, and allow me to invest as an individual, because one way or another, I'm going to fund Surbhi on this." And then they said yes. And that's how I got my first seed money. So, so even those really dark moments, if you let yourself feel them and you let yourself react appropriately, could turn into something beautiful. And she stayed with me the whole time. She invested in the company. And she enjoyed talking to people that said no to me.
Yeah, one more question.
Thank you very much. I'm Benny. I'm studying energy engineering. And a lot of people, they may get their one yes a lot earlier on than others. And sometimes the no's can go on and on and on. And my question was, how can you kind of keep yourself, motivated so that all of the no's, there's a point in which you might doubt that it actually is possible. So in order to keep going or to, count what you have.
Yeah. So I'll give you some controversial advice on that one. So controversial. It's to write a business plan. I know, it's like not the cool kid thing to do. I raised money, I wrote a deck, and I just went out there and I was like, "Hey, that's my company." Okay, but when you write a business plan, and a business plan should be why you think this is a good company, what the path forward is, and how you're going to mitigate the obstacles that come your way. It's a synopsis of all the physician feedback or the customer feedback you've gotten that says, "Hey, this is a great thing to do." And so you don't just get no's and then you have like 2 weeks to recover and then you get another no or another yes. Often when you're pitching, you're seeing like 4 investors a day, and you got a no from the first 3. You have to be able to be like back on your feet for the 4th one. So for me, actually putting pen to paper and writing out exactly what my plan was going to be and why I thought it was a good idea, and capturing feedback from every single physician saying it was a good idea and being able to reread that really kept me going. You know what I mean? But I think it is really important to reassess, right? But when you have that business plan and this venture capitalist says, "Oh no, I think this is, I don't want to do this because the size of the market is this." It's good. It's good to go home and reassess and say, is that true? And if you already have the documentation, or you've laid out the size of the market, or you've already done the thinking, that process is a little faster. But I think you always should reevaluate whether what you're working on is the right solution to the problem you're trying to tackle.
All right. Good. Well, I think time is up, so please join me in thanking Surbhi for sharing her inspirational story.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
A small token of our appreciation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you
Wait,
again.
we're going to take a photo.
Oh, photo.
Yeah, like.
Oh, right, like just me and this. Okay.
3 of us? Okay. And I'd like to thank the MET Student Board once again. Thank you, Surbhi.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you all for coming. And go Bears.
Go Bears.